Okay. Ça tourne. We're turning. Good. Rolling.
The entire team of Three Models Film would like to thank you for agreeing to answer our questions today on the occasion of the French release of your first feature film, Mãrama,
Yes.
which will be in theaters tomorrow, April 22nd. My first question is, so you have explained on multiple occasions that Mãrama was originally conceived as a historical drama, but evolved into a horror film after uncovering more of the tragic history and suffering of Maori colonization. I would like to ask you if you could tell us more about this, how this shift in genre has affected the writing and directing of the film.
If it helps, I can definitely pinpoint one particular moment where I thought, as you say, this is not a historic drama,
Yes.
slightly heavy historic drama. This is a horror. And it was maybe because I'm a bit more visual. Like, this is the first script I've ever written. So perhaps the thing that provoked me was an image. In fact, it was a photograph of a Victorian collector called H.R. Robley of preserved heads. And it was a photograph of him, I think maybe even around about the time that our film is set, in the maybe a bit later, 1880s, 1890s. And it was a photograph of him in his Victorian parlour, you know, sitting there very confidently in front of a wall of Maori preserved heads, 29 of them, or 36. I can't remember the number. It doesn't matter. One would have been horrific enough, but a whole wall of them was that was the provocation for me. And that became a moment where I was like, actually, horror, I think. No, not I think. This is a horror. And I had some pushback on that in the beginning from people involved. They were like, don't call it a horror. It's not a horror. It's going to disappoint people. It won't be, it will disappoint horror fans. And also you'll disappear and no one will watch it. Well, that didn't prove to be correct. It's helped, if anything, I feel. Defining my film as a Maori Gothic horror has helped me make it feel a bit more, it's more unique, because there's never been,
unique.
If you're going to categorize things, okay, well, here's a new category that didn't exist until my film, Maori Gothic horror. And you can disagree and say it's not a horror, and that's fine, but I made it and I call it a Maori Gothic horror, so for me it is. But sorry, does that answer
yes, totally.
question?
Maybe like how was it to incorporate these spiritual elements? Because in a previous interview you said that it wasn't supernatural per se, but more spiritual, this connection with the other world, and maybe like this shift into the horror genre has allowed you maybe more creativity.
I actually do remember, previous drafts before I decided this is a horror.
Yes,
incorporated the spiritual elements because I don't think of communicating with one's ancestors, however you do that, whether it's in a mirror or not. I don't think that's horror. I don't think that's ghostly. I think someone once asked me, so your ghost story? And I was like, it's not a ghost story. It's about spirituality, and it's about connections between ancestral connections. And that I don't think actually that it was me going, it's a horror, and that unlocked me to lean more into the spirituality, as I would call it, because that was there already. That's one of the least horrific elements of the film for me, is the fact that the lead character finds this way to communicate with her. That, I like that about her character and her ability as the word is matakite in Maori, and I think the translation loosely is a seer, or someone who's able to communicate with the dead and oftentimes foresee the future. I don't speak to that element, but I definitely speak to her ability, which she reconnects with, to not speak with, but to communicate, I suppose, or have an interaction with her predecessors. The thing about the film is it's a film that's equally about identity as it is about cultural appropriation,
yes.
God, or theft and colonization. Those are inherently horrific, I feel, but the search for one's identity, that's a very universal theme. You know, everyone wants to know who they are, and I think most people want to know who they are, and most people are interested in who they come from. And certainly that was one of the main themes of the film for me.
Well, this leads me to my second question. So you have, as you said, reflected on your personal journey, reconnecting with your roots, which is obviously a central theme in the film. Yet, as a white passing person, if I may, who mostly grew up in England, you raised the questions yourself about your own position in the story. I wanted to ask you, how did you reconcile these doubts, and in what ways has the creation of Mãrama impacted you personally since?
As a white passing person?
Like
that's interesting. No, I've not been called a white passing person before, but that's interesting because I do think of myself as a white passing person sometimes. I do, a lot, because listen to how I talk. You know, I don't sound like a New Zealander. Or Maori, maybe. But what does a New Zealander or a Maori sound like? I don't know. I don't have that accent because I've lived most of my life in England. And you're right. I am a white passing person for the main part. Just on pure appearance, perhaps. And you touch on something quite specific, which is my concern when I was conceiving the idea for this film, my concern about what right do I have to try and tell this story as someone who has never suffered in any significant way from colonization, for example. On the contrary, I've had a privileged upbringing happens to be in England, but before that I lived around the world as well. I've had a privileged upbringing and education. So who am I to speak to it? But I don't know. I got over that, and I was more than got over it. I was inspired to start, or to try and find the confidence, not only by my mother, who would tell stories about our ancestors, but also by a trip that I made to New Zealand for the first time after not being there for many years, maybe even 20 years I hadn't been back. And I went there with a short film that I'd made to a festival in New Zealand called the Māoriland Film Festival, which is in a tiny town called Otaki in the North Island, which is an area that my mother grew up in. So visiting that festival and speaking with Māori people who were even related to me, speaking to my relations, and certainly people who knew my mother and our family, was an inspiration for me. And it opened my head, and it made me feel like, oh, maybe it's okay for me to try and tell this story, even though I've really never lived in New Zealand. But that was also part of the reason why I chose the story that I did, and I crafted the story the way I did, because it seemed like, well, on two levels. Personally, I can tell a story about being an outsider in a country like the UK because I have that experience. But also, it was interesting to me to try and tell that story because I hadn't seen it before. I've seen many great films about Māori, but they take place in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And often, unfortunately, because there's stories that speak to, like Utu, if you look that one up, they speak to the colonization of the Māori, subjugation of Māori in Aotearoa. But I also know from a minimum amount of research and from my own life experience that Māori travel. They get out of New Zealand, they move around the world, they have their own stories around the world. And I wanted to try and tell one of those stories about a young Māori woman who in 1859 is afforded the opportunity to come all the way to the other side of the world, to Victorian England, with the lure, with the offer of, with the promise of knowledge about who she is. So back to identity as well. Mm-hmm. So. And then we find out what we find out. But anyway, I wanted to very consciously wanted to position the story around maybe the archetypal colonized individual taking the fight to the colonizers. I didn't see that very much. I saw colonized individuals, some of them heroes, some of them victims, being colonized in their colonized country, but I wanted to try and flip that a bit. So that was the idea for Mãrama.
Thank you very much. And my third question is about the subtitles, because we noticed that a few Māori words were left unsubtitled in the film. Could you explain that choice to us?
It's entirely intentional. It's not a few, it's a whole bunch of Māori words, because there's waiata, which stands for song, it's the Māori word for songs. There's karakia, which is the Māori word for prayers. And there's a central pivotal moment in the film, a haka. Which, if you don't know what a haka is, I would suggest looking it up. But no, a haka is it's many things. It can be a challenge, it can be a celebration, and it's an extremely powerful event. And I intentionally did not want to put any subtitles over any of those because A, I didn't want to colonize that piece of culture, and B, I thought surely the sound and the performance is telling you what you need to know. I hope it does. Like if it doesn't, I'm sorry. And some people, you're right, some people have said, oh, I would have really liked to know what's being said, especially in the haka. And I'm like, you don't need to know that. I'm telling you, it just loses strength and power and weight. Just let the haka do its thing. Let the song, the waiata, do its thing. Let the prayer, the karakia, do its thing. You don't have to know everything, actually. So, but yes, you noticed it, and it was fully intentional. Those things did not feel like they needed translating at all. Then there's Maori, te reo Maori. The Maori language is used when it's used in dramatic moments or when it's used as part of the plot. Obviously, that's translated. So don't worry, you're not coming to see a film in a language that you won't understand.
So last question, a major subplot in the film is the allyship between Mãrama and Peggy, who is also a woman of color facing colonization. And there's this particular powerful scene where she's forced to wear a fake moko kawaii, if I'm correct, which she feels shame for until Mãrama comforts her. Yeah. And so I would like to ask you if you could comment on the significance of this allyship, but also the shared use of some sort of cultural symbol as a form of empowerment?
Gosh, first of all, I'm so glad that you say that, because I worry that people won't see the mokokowai that she has to wear when she's being, spoiler alert, abused by her employer, Sir Nathaniel Cole, because that was an important part of the script for me, and I wrote it in as, I think I might have even had a scene where she's applying it with red lipstick, putting it on, and I wished I'd included that. But anyway, we reduced when we were developing the script and shooting it, to the extent that you just briefly notice. But I'm so glad that you notice that, because some people don't, because it is a bit dark and it's a bit quick and you see different things. But that was super important to me, that she's forced by Cole, in his obsession with all things Māori, to put on to mask a mokokowai, as you call it. Mokokowai just means, moko is the word for tattoo, and kowai is the Māori word for jaw, actually. But you're right, it's specific to females, Māori females of mana, or standing. And it was very important to me that happens in the scene, and that the moment after we reveal that he's abusing her, yes, that she finds herself with Mãrama, and that Mãrama can comfort her. And there's one moment when she puts her hand and says she's sorry, you know. Oh man. And it's quite emotional, but when she's seen the photo, I think that comes to her, doesn't it? She says two things. She says, she's with child, which of course means, fuck, I might get pregnant with a guy that's abusing me. There's that, I imagine, but also she's with child. And then also she's wearing the mokokowai. And I think she's ashamed, but also she's terrified and horrified and ashamed. And I love that Mãrama's able to say, when she apologizes and says, I'm sorry, she says, don't ever apologize. This is what I wanted her to say, but I think it was enough to say, don't be, sorry. So it was very important to me as the answer that was acknowledged between those two women. I don't know what you feel their relationship at the end of the film is, but my feeling is that their relationship at the end of the film is, even though it's 1859, in as much as they can be, they're together as a couple. I don't know whether people take that away from the film, but that's, for me, that's how I feel that storyline progresses, and that's how I want to continue it with part 2 and 3 of the trilogy, is with Peggy and Mãrama together as a couple. Yeah.
That's very exciting.
I hope so.
I think we're out of time, so thank you once again for answering our questions, and it was a huge pleasure for us.